In Lecture 1, we introduced what PLCs are, why they were developed, and why they replace traditional relay systems. Today, in Lecture 2, we're going to take a closer look at the main parts of a PLC. Understanding these parts is essential because every PLC, no matter how small or large, is built around these same core components. Transition. So let's break the PLC into its building blocks and examine each one. This diagram shows the basic architecture of a PLC, how inputs come in, are processed, and how outputs are controlled. Think of it as the PLC's anatomy. Each block has a specific role. On the left are the input modules. These are connected to input sensing devices like push buttons, limit switches, and sensors. The input module converts these real-world signals into electrical signals the PLC can understand. Notice the optical isolation. This protects the PLC's electronics from electrical noise or surges that could come from field devices. In the center is the CPU, the brain of the PLC. The CPU continuously scans inputs, runs the logic stored in its memory, and updates the outputs accordingly. The memory stores both the program instructions, ladder logic, and the data needed to run the process. Below, you see the programming device, usually a computer running software like RSLogix or Studio 5000. This is how engineers write, test, and download programs into the PLC's memory. On the right are the output modules. These connect to real-world output devices like motors, lights, and solenoids. Just like inputs, outputs also go through optical isolation for protection. The CPU decides which output should be turned on or off based on the program logic and the current input conditions. At the top is the power supply module, which provides the DC power required to run the PLC's electronics. In most large systems, this power supply does not power the field devices. Those are powered separately. Every PLC, whether it's a tiny unit with just a handful of inputs and outputs or a large modular rack system with hundreds of connections, is built on these same parts: power supply, CPU, memory, input, output modules, and programming device. Let us now take a closer look at each of these components. There are two ways in which inputs and outputs are incorporated into the PLC. A fixed I/O PLC shown in this picture comes in a single package with no removable or swappable modules. Everything, CPU, power supply, input section, and output section, is built into one compact unit. The inputs and outputs are predefined and limited. The number of inputs/outputs cannot be expanded beyond what is built into the unit. A fixed I/O system is typically used for smaller applications where the control requirements are simple. The advantage is lower cost, ease of installation, and a compact size. The limitations are lack of flexibility. Once you reach the built-in I/O limit, you can't add more. If your control needs expand, you may need to replace the entire PLC with a larger unit. On the right, you see the structure. Input devices connect directly to the built-in input terminals. The CPU processes the logic, and the output devices connect directly to the output terminals. No separate modules or racks are involved. Everything is contained in one housing. Unlike fixed I/O, a modular I/O PLC is made up of separate modules that plug into a rack or base. This design allows you to mix and match modules to meet specific application needs. The modules slide into the rack and connect through a common backplane, which enables communication between them. Typically, there are individual modules for the power supply, processor, input, and output sections. The power supply module provides the DC power needed for all the modules plugged into the rack, including the CPU, input modules, and output modules. It's essentially the lifeline of the PLC, ensuring each component receives stable, regulated voltage. Next, let's look at the CPU, the real brain of the PLC, which uses that power to execute control logic. The processor, or CPU, is the brain of the PLC. It contains a microprocessor that executes all the logic instructions and coordinates communication among the modules. Every decision the PLC makes, whether to turn on a motor, count a part, or trigger an alarm, happens inside the CPU. The functions of a CPU include logic execution that processes ladder logic or other control instructions step by step. It also manages data flow between input modules, output modules, memory, and connected devices. Finally, it performs diagnostics that checks system status, errors, and faults. Without the CPU, the PLC is just a box of components. The CPU is what makes it a smart, decision-making controller. This is also the module you most often interact with when downloading or monitoring programs. On the right, you see examples of Allen Bradley SLC CPUs. Notice they look like individual modules, because in modular PLCs, the CPU is a separate plug-in module that slides into the rack. So far, we've covered the power supply and processor. Next, we'll look at the input and output modules, which allow the PLC to interact with the outside world. The I/O, input-output, system is the bridge between the PLC and the real world. It allows the CPU to read signals from field devices and then send control commands back out. Without I/O modules, the PLC would have no way to interact with the process. Input devices, such as push buttons, limit switches, and sensors are hardwired to the input module terminals. When an operator presses a push button or a sensor detects an object, the input module converts that electrical signal into a logic signal the CPU can understand. Inputs are usually either discrete, on-off signals, or analog, variable signals such as temperature or pressure. Think of inputs as the senses of the PLC, like our eyes, ears, and touch. The output modules send signals from the CPU to control real-world devices. Output devices include motor starters, solenoid valves, alarms, and indicator lights, the things that actually perform work. When the CPU activates an output, the module supplies the proper voltage/current to energize the device. Outputs may also be discrete, on-off, or analog, variable, like motor speed or valve position. Analogy: if inputs are the senses, outputs are the muscles of the PLC. A programming device is used to create, enter, and edit the PLC program. It allows engineers or technicians to load the desired control logic into the processor's memory. The programming device connects directly to the PLC, either by cable or network connection. Once connected, the user can download programs into the CPU, upload programs for editing, or monitor the logic in real time. Today, the personal computer, PC, is the most widely used programming device for PLCs. With specialized software, a PC allows engineers to write, test, and monitor PLC programs. When connected to the PC lets you watch the program execute in real time. You can see which rungs are active, which instructions are evaluating as true or false, and how timers or counters are updating. This capability makes troubleshooting much faster and easier. On the screen here, you see RS Logic's 500 Pro. Notice the project structure on the left, the ladder logic in the center, and the status highlighting that shows live execution. This layout makes it much easier to organize, understand, and manage large PLC programs. Using the PC, the programmer creates a series of instructions called a program. These instructions tell the CPU how to respond to inputs and when to activate outputs. The most common PLC programming language is relay ladder logic. It was designed to resemble traditional relay control circuits, allowing electricians and engineers to easily transition from hardwired systems to programmable controllers. Programs are made up of rungs of logic, arranged like rungs on a ladder and read top to bottom, left to right. Each rung contains instructions, such as contacts, coils, timers, counters, or branches that represent the logic sequence controlling the process. Now that we understand how programs are written and entered into the PLC, our next step is to examine the scan cycle, the process by which the PLC continuously reads inputs, executes the program, and updates outputs in real time. The PLC program does not run just once. It is executed as part of a repetitive process known as the scan cycle. The scan cycle is the heartbeat of the PLC, ensuring the controller is always reading inputs, solving logic, and updating outputs. The scan begins with the CPU reading the status of all inputs. This includes push buttons, limit switches, sensors, and other field devices wired to the input modules. Next, the CPU executes the user program, rung by rung, top to bottom, left to right. Here, the PLC determines which outputs should be turned on or OFF based on the logic instructions. After executing the logic, the CPU updates the outputs. This means energizing motor starters, turning on indicator lights, or opening valves as required. Finally, the PLC performs internal checks, updates communication with programming devices or other PLCs, and gets ready for the next cycle. This cycle repeats continuously, thousands of times per second in modern PLCs. That's why PLCs can react almost instantly to changing input conditions on the factory floor. Understanding the scan is critical because it explains why timing, program order, and input-output delays matter. For example, if your sensor signal is too fast and shorter than the scan time, the PLC might miss it.